So good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thanks for joining me for the next session of our EstimatorXpress software skills course. This session is all about the specifications, or 95% about specifications, and then there's a couple of other settings I want to show you at the end. So during Module 3, I hope you will get to grips with what specifications are, which specifications are suitable for which type of work, how to make changes within the specification, so how you can swap over the resources that are being used, and how you can make changes to the rates of usage of those resources. At the end, I'll also talk you through how you can set your default profit markup and overheads and inflation rates as well, so I'll touch on that as well. So we're going to start off again in the library of our software, and as I'm sure you'll recall from the last session, the library is where all of the underlying settings for the estimates belong or live. So on the navigator on the left of your screen, if you click the arrow next to where it says library, that will expand the library options, and second in the list we've got specifications. So if you click where it says specifications, and that will open up a list of all of the library specifications available in your software. So the specifications you have available may vary depending on the edition of the software that you're running. So you might not have a list as long as mine. I've also got a specification in there that I have created myself. So if you've created any yourself, you might have some that I don't have as well. Okay, so I'll just do a quick run through of all the specifications are available, just so you know what they're there for and what they do and what kind of work you can estimate with them. So I'm going to go in my own order, which is slightly different from the way they're presented on screen. So I'm going to start with the new build specification. So the new build specification aligns with the latest building regs. So the Part L building regs, it's based on the government's elemental recipe for new builds. So that means things like it allows for wider cavities, for increased cavity insulation, and so on. The new build spec also has the fastest build speeds, and it defaults to a JCB for all of the groundwork. So it assumes you've got the space to get a backhoe loader in for the groundwork. So that's kind of the premise of the new build specification. Then we have the extension specification. So this is the specification that you would want to use for any standard extension work. The main difference between the extension specification and the new build specification is that the extension spec allows longer build times for many of the different tasks. So it works on the assumption that an extension is likely to be slightly slower due to issues like access, care of the existing property, in addition to the fact that you're likely to be doing shorter runs, smaller, slightly more niggly bits of work. So it will allow slightly longer for your labour tasks to be completed. In terms of the groundwork and the excavation, it defaults to using a mini digger. As you saw when we created our estimate, you can override those defaults by selecting a different mini spec option. So if you're carrying out an extension somewhere where the space is very limited, you can't even get a mini digger in, there's an option to select manual excavation. So you can tweak the plant or labour that's being used for excavating your foundations if you need to, but the new build defaults to JCB, the extension defaults to a mini digger. Similar to the extension specification, we've got the renovation specification. So as with the extension spec, it gives you longer build times. As with the renovation job, you're more likely to have unforeseen issues, challenges along the duration of the project. Plus you've got all those added complications that I mentioned for an extension in terms of access, care of the property, and so on. If you are estimating a loft or a garage conversion, you can select the renovation specification. So we also have a number of timber frame specifications. So we'll start with the new build timber frame spec. This specification should be used when you're having a full timber frame kit supplied for the job. So that includes the inner leaf timber frame panels for the walls and also the roof structure. So how the specification works is it takes like a standard new build spec, but then it strips out the inner leaf and the cavity walls, and it also removes the timber from the roof in terms of what's included in the estimate, and then you can add in a price for a supplied timber frame kit to the estimate. And similar to that, we've got the extension timber frame spec. This is identical to the new build timber frame spec, but again, it allows longer build times. The other two timber frame specs we've got are what we call site fabricated timber frame spec. So there's a new build and an extension site fabricated timber frame spec. So these were developed to allow for the scenario where you're constructing your own timber frame panels on site. So it only deals with the timber frame walls. So again, so for the new build timber frame spec, it takes the new build specification, removes the inner leaf of the cavity walls, and then it allows you to either price for your own timber frame panels that you're constructing on site, or alternatively, if you're getting a supplied kit for the timber frame walls, you can add a price for that to your estimate. And the extension version works in exactly the same way. Again, the build speeds are the main difference there between the extension and new build specs. So that's what the different specifications cover, and then hopefully you've got an understanding of which specification you would pick for which type of job. But now I'll just talk a little bit more about what specifications actually do. So a specification is similar to an architect's spec, which of course is a list of materials that is chosen for a job. So yeah, in the software, the specifications, in addition to setting out which materials are going to be used, they select the labourers or the gangs that you're going to use, and also define the plant and tools and so on that are going to be used for particular tasks. So you can work with the specifications that come in the software out of the box, or you can copy them as I've done here and make your own. You can change the specifications as much as you like, and the idea of them is that you do that. The idea is that you tailor them so that they suit the way that you work and the way you estimate and the way you normally construct your projects. So a couple of examples of ways that you might make changes to the specification. Say perhaps you regularly work with a particular architect who always specifies a particular type of timber for his roof joists. Maybe it's slightly different from the norm. So if you tend to do new build work with him, just for example, you could copy the new build spec, give it a new name, XYZ Architects new build specification. You could then open that specification, find the timber products, swap them over to the ones that your architect uses or specifies, and then whenever you do work for that particular architect, you can select that specification with his default choice of roof timbers in there. So you know you've already got the materials set up correctly and you don't need to worry about them. Or say you like to use a different type of block from the ones which are specified as standard in our specifications, you could copy the extension specification if that's the type of work you're doing. You can make a new one. I've called it my extension spec. You can call it Bob's extension spec, XYZ building company extension specification, whatever you want. Go into the specification, find the places where the 7 Newton blocks are specified, change them to 10 Newton, just to pick an example, because that's the way you like to work. And then whenever you start on a new estimate for an extension, You can select your extension specification and the blocks are already set to the ones you like to use. So you can create your own specifications, or it may be that you might just like to go into the standard specifications and make those changes in there. So in summary, a specification is just a default way of working. You can, of course, make minor tweaks within each estimate, but if there's an item that you find you're changing in many or every estimate, then it makes sense to make the changes within the library specifications. And then it saves you having to repeat the changes every time you do an estimate. So over time, you can, as I say, you can evolve the existing specifications, or you can create your own custom specifications to suit different sets of circumstances. If you tend to do the same type of job over and over again, then that's going to save you a lot of time only making those changes once within the library specifications. Okay, so let's open up a specification, have a look at what's contained within the specification, and then we can have a go at making some changes in there. So if we start with the extension specification and click the copy button, give your extension specification a new name. You can just call it training extension specification, or name it after yourself, whatever. We can always delete it afterwards. You'll see the specifications that you create yourself have got a delete button. You can remove them. You can't delete the system specifications, so the ones that come out of the box. So give it a name, click OK, and then the specification will open up. Okay, so the specification screen may feel quite similar because it's organized in a very similar way to the estimating calculator screen. Within the estimating calculator screen, you're focusing in on one small element of a job. So for example, your brick and block cavity walls. Specification lists everything that you might use within a project. So it's a lot bigger, but the organization of it is exactly the same. So on the left-hand side, we've got the item used for column. So this tells us what every material, what every labor item, what every plant item is going to be used for within the estimate. Next, we have a description of the resource that is being used for that particular task. So for example, if we have a look at our cavity insulation, so for our cavity insulation, we've got cavity wall insulation pack, 10 sheets specified at the moment. So as with the estimating calculator, the specification sections are all organized so that you've got your material items at the top, and then if you scroll a little way down, you'll see the labor items which correspond to those materials. So for example, if I scroll back up, we've got the cavity insulation material, and then if I scroll down a few times, we should be able to find, she says, I think I've gone too far. Just trying to remind myself what it's called. We can always use the search box. If you haven't got that search box at the top of your screen here, you can press Control and F for find. I'm just going to type in cavity insulation. Right. Then if I scroll down, and hopefully you can do the same on your screen, you'll come to a line called Fix Cavity Insulation. So that's the labour task associated with the material specified further up. So we've got 2 bricklayers and a mate specified to fix the cavity insulation. At the bottom, we've also got a few plant items associated with constructing our cavity wall specification. So this top section is the cavity wall specification. This means that all of the cavity wall calculators refer to this section of our extension specification when we're estimating cavity walls within an estimate that we've chosen the extension specification for. So the top section is the cavity wall specification. If we scroll down a little way, you'll see we move on to other sections of the specification. So we've got stone-faced cavity wall specification, cavity block wall specification. So these are items, these are lines which will only be required for a cavity block wall specification. Or we've got the stud wall specification here, and so on. You can see all the different wall construction methods and the specification lines associated with that particular construction method. So I've still got my screen filtered at the moment, so if I press the X button, I can get rid of that filter now. I'll scroll down again. So scrolling through all those different wall types. I'm just going to get through all the walls because I want to show you that the walls are just the first part of the specification. Stud metal partitions. And then eventually we'll get to this section, the tiled roof general specification. So if you estimate any kind of sloping tiled roof, be it a lean-to or an apex roof or a valley roof or a hip roof, all of those estimating calculators will refer to this tiled roof general specification to find out what materials they should be using, what labour items they're using, and also the rates of usage of those particular resources. So you'll see, again, we start with the materials for the tiled roof, and then further down we've got the labourers and gangs who are carrying out those tasks, and there's no plant items in that section. Okay, so the main takeaway from today, hopefully, is that the specification that you choose is in control. It's the boss of your estimate. It tells your estimate what products to use for each of the different tasks, how much of them to use. It tells the estimate who is going to do a task, so who's going to lay the tiles, who's going to fix the guttering, who's going to fix the plasterboard to the ceiling, and so on. And it also tells the estimate how long it will take them to do that using what we call usage factors. So the specification continues in this way. So it's organised into the different sections: material items first, then labour, then any plant if applicable. So hopefully you're getting a feel for what the specification does in terms of telling the estimate what resources to use. Let's have a look at how we can change things within the specification to suit the way we estimate and the way we work on site. So there are two ways that you can change the specification basically. You can either select a different resource, so a different material or a different labourer for a task, or you can alter the usage factor for that resource. So that means you can alter how much of the material is used for a task or how much time it takes the labourer to do the task. So those are the two changes. You can swap a resource or you can alter the usage factor of a resource. So let's start with swapping a resource, and we'll swap a material. So focusing back in on our cavity insulation. So if you need to, scroll back up to the top of your screen and about 12 or 15 lines down, hopefully you can see where it says cavity insulation, which is highlighted in red. Items in red are items that we've given a critical marker. So those are items which are likely to have a significant impact on your estimate, either because they're high value items or because it's a resource that you purchase in large quantities. The fact that there's items highlighted in red actually can help us focus in and find things on screen as well. So I might refer to the colour of the text as well while we're making our changes. So if you click on cavity insulation, you can click anywhere in the line. as I mentioned before, so we've got a cavity wall insulation, old style cavity wall pack, 10 sheets which cover 5.46 square meters. Let's say we want to swap that for a Celotex type product. So to make a change to swap a resource that's specified, we want to click on the Change Resource button on the top menu. The one with a picture of the price book, that green book there is our price book. So you'll see the price book opens up in front of the specification. So this is our price book, which hopefully feels vaguely familiar now. Because the original resource that was specified for this job was an insulation type product, it's opened up with all the insulation type materials in front of us. So it's gone down to that insulation type. So that should help us locate the product we need a bit more quickly. So we're going to use a 75mm Celotex type product from the HPXL Price Tracker Plus product range. We use the non-branded name for this type of product, which I believe is polyisocyanurate, however one pronounces it. I'm going to call it polyiso board just for ease. So if we scroll down a little way, hopefully you'll come to a chunk of resources called polyiso insulation board, and you can see we've got the various thicknesses of board there. I should just say at this point, if you've added your own products to the price book, as we went through last week, so we added a sheep's wool product. At this point, you can apply it to the specification, so you can use any of your own resources. Once they've been added to the price book, you can select them for use in the specification. But for now, what we want is the polyiso board 2400 by 1200 by 75 mil. You click on that particular product, so it's the 75 mil board. It'll be highlighted in blue, and then we can click Select Resource. Now, whenever you swap a resource, the Edit Resource dialog box will open up. That's prompting you to check the usage factor of the particular resource that you've selected. When you change a resource, it might have a different usage factor. So in this case, because we're swapping from a cavity wall insulation, cavity wall pack for a polyiso board, the usage factor of those particular materials is quite different. So the usage factor determines how much of a material is used for a task, or how long a labourer takes to do a task if you're swapping a labour resource. So the original insulation we started out with, as it says here, it covers 5.46 square meters. The polyiso board we've selected is 2.4 by 1.2 meters, which from past experience I worked out to be 2.88 square meters. So the coverage of this insulation is different. So the software doesn't automatically update the usage factor when you change resource. There's a number of different reasons for that. So you need to tell EstimatorXpress what the new usage factor is. If you know what the usage factor is, you can type it directly into this box here. So this is telling us, at the moment, it's telling us how much of that cavity wall pack is used per square meter, which was 0.183. But how much of our cavity wall board is needed per square meter? Well, we need to do a bit of maths to work that out. So unless it's an easy usage factor that you can just type in, you can use the calculator button here to help you. Okay, so we call this the workings. So at the moment it's saying I use one polyiso board for 5.46 square meters of cavity insulation. As we know, that's been inherited from the previously specified resource, so it's not correct. So if we change this to 2.88, because we know one of those boards covers 2.88 square meters, that updates the usage factor here to say that we're using 0.3472 of one of those boards per square meter of wall that we need to insulate. So just using my knowledge of maths, I know that's just over 1/3 of a board, which is about right, isn't it? Because it's just under 3 meters. So that sounds right. So if you're ever in doubt about what the usage factor means or what it is you need to input, click the calculator button, read through those workings, and it usually becomes very clear. So if we click OK, we can see the estimate rate here has been updated. It now costs £11.63 per metre squared, so this product is slightly more expensive, as you'd expect. We can also check the build phase. Sometimes when you switch resource, you may need to change the build phase. Usually you don't, so that's fine as it is for now, so we can just click OK. So now if we just have a quick look across the specification, we can see that that Celotex type polyiso board has been specified. We can see how much of it's been used per square metre. We can see the square metre rate. And now if I select this specification when I create an estimate, it's going to use polyiso board rather than a cavity wall pack. So we've simply swapped one product for another and checked that we're using the right amount per square metre. Okay, so because we've changed from one resource to quite a different type of resource, we also need to think about whether that change will alter the build speed and whether we need to change the usage factor for the labour to fit that particular material. So in the case of our insulation here, the insulation we've got specified now, this polyiso board, is going to take longer to install, isn't it? Because it's going to require cutting to size, taping and so on. Whereas the old cavity pack just gets chucked into place, doesn't it, really? So it's a lot quicker. So now we can look at the second type of change that you can make within the specification. This is where we stick with the same resource. So we're not going to change the labour that we've got specified, but we are going to alter just the usage factor, which can either speed up or slow down the build speed. So as we saw before, this cavity insulation, if we scroll down, has an equivalent labour task, which is fixed cavity insulation. So if you can find the items in red that are, say, place cavity fill and backfill trench, and then about 6 rows down from there we've got fixed cavity insulation. So you'll see that we have a 2-in-1 gang, bricklaying gang specified to do that job. So we're not going to change the bricklaying gang. If you wanted to, you could. So you could go through, if you wanted to put one bricklayer and a mate in for all these tasks, you could do that. But in this example here, we're going to stick with that 2-in-1 gang, but we're going to change their work rate for this particular task of fixing the cavity insulation. So to do that, highlight where it says fixed cavity insulation and then click the edit resource button. So we're not changing the resource, we don't need to swap it, we're just editing what's there already. When you do that, the edit resource box opens up. Click on the usage factor calculator again and have a read through the workings in there. Okay, so at the moment it's saying it's going to take 1 hour for this 2-in-1 gang to do just under 28 square meters of fixing of the cavity insulation. So there's a couple of ways we could change this. Let's say that our new insulation, we're going to estimate it takes twice as long to install. So we could change the figure in either box. We could say it takes 2 hours, so change that 1 to 2. It takes 2 hours to do that area of cavity insulation, which will obviously halve the build speed, so it will cost twice as much. It will use twice as much time to complete that particular task. Or we can do it the other way. We can leave that set to 1 hour and change the area in the bottom. We could say it takes 14 square meters to do an hour. This is estimating here, isn't it? I mean, it's not an exact figure, it's not an exact science, but we know it's going to take longer and we know it's going to cost more. So we can play around with those figures until we're happy. So I'm just going to round up to 14 square meters. You can see the usage factor changing here. If we click OK and go back to this screen, we can see the estimate rate, so how much it's going to cost per square meter. That might give you a better idea of whether the figures you've entered seem about right. So if you ever need to make those usage factor changes, click the calculator button, read through the workings and play around with those figures until you're happy that the usage factor, so the rate of the build speed for this particular task seems about right to you. So again, you can change the build phase if you need to, but in this case, of course, we don't. So if we click OK, that takes us back to our specification. So just to reiterate, we haven't changed the resource. We're using that same bricklaying gang, but we have altered the build speed for that particular task. So of course, you can do these two particular changes, make these two particular changes on any line within the specification. So let's say we want to do a simple trick of doubling up the usage of plasterboard, which you'd do if you were fitting 2 layers of board to a wall. So if we can find the plastering to the inner block wall, so we need to scroll up a little bit. Okay, so that's just to see how far down I am. So I've gone back to the top and scrolled down a few times, and then hopefully you can find this plastering to inner block wall. Again, you can use your search box if you need to find a particular line more easily. If you can locate the skirting boards in red, and then it's 3 rows up. So again, if we wanted to double up on the plasterboard, so we're happy with the resource that's there, but we just want twice as much. Click on the row you want to edit the resource for, click the Edit Resource button, and then it's just a case of tweaking the usage factor. So you could just do it here. So you could say I'm doubling that, so it needs to be 0.7. Or you can use the usage factor calculator, and you can change the top figure. So you're saying I'm using 2 of those plasterboard sheets for the same area that it was estimating before. So okay. So again, that's had the same effect. You see the usage factors doubled down here. So if we click OK, so we're now putting 2 layers of plasterboard on our walls. You see the estimate rate there is doubled as well. We can now then think about the labour allowed to do this. So again, scrolling down to find the labour item. There is a row called Fix Stroke Apply Plastering to Walls, just under our cavity insulation that we've just edited. Again, use the search box to locate it if you can't easily find it by eye. And then we can click the Edit Resource button and look at the usage factor calculator. So the software is allowing 1 hour for every 9 square meters of plasterboard, fixing those 9 square meters of plasterboard. So you could say, right, it's not going to take twice as long to do a second layer, but it might take 50% longer. So we could enter 1.5 in this top box instead. So the estimate rate was 6.93. If we click OK, now we can see it's £10.40 per square metre. So in this way, we can use the usage factors to tweak the amount of a resource or material that's required, or to alter the build time, so the time it takes to carry out that particular task. So these are all just for practice purposes. So the figures might not make exact sense, but hopefully it shows you the principles of what you can do. So the two main changes you can make within a specification are to swap a resource using the change resource button, or just to edit the amount of that resource that's been used for a task, and you use the edit resource button to do that. So we only went through one example, didn't we, of changing a resource, but say for example you wanted to change some of your roof timbers. I'm going to scroll down to the Apex roof. Here we go, the tiled roof general specification. I'm scrolling down a little bit further, and here we can see the specific roof configuration. So we've got the timbers that are used for an Apex cut roof. Then we can see the timbers that are used for an Apex truss roof, the timbers that are just used for a valley cut roof, and so on. So the tiled roof general specification includes all of the general details that are used on any tiled roof, and then there's the specific resources that are used for the different roof types, roof shapes. So say for example you wanted to change your Apex roof rafters. So for any Apex roofs that you construct, at the moment it's 125mm timber. Say you wanted to swap that for 150mm timber, click change resource. Price book opens up in the carcassing timber section. So it should be just a case of looking just slightly further down the line. So the resources that the software is using as standard are based on a square meter rate. Not square meter, excuse me, a meter rate. So this is the cost per meter for that timber. So make sure you're selecting an equivalent, otherwise your usage factors won't work. So here we'll see the 150mm wide timber, which is purchased by the meter. You can, of course, select one of these specific lengths of carcassing timber, but you would then need to tweak the usage factor to take into account that you're purchasing it as a 2.4 meter length, but you're using it by the meter. So you'll need to adjust the usage factors. But if you want to do like for like, select the timber that is priced on a meter basis. Click select, and you'll see the usage factor for this type of timber that's bought by the meter and is used by the meter. The usage factor is 1 because it's a 1-to-1 ratio for what you buy and what you use. If it was a 2.4 meter length, then you'd have to go into the usage factor calculator and you would say I use one of these 2.4 meter lengths of timber to do 2.4 meters of Apex roof rafters, and then the maths would still be right. But as it is, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So we can click OK. So hopefully then you're getting a good feel for how you can swap the resources and how you can edit those usage factors if you need to edit the amount of material that's used or the time that it takes for your tradespeople, your labourers, to do a particular task. Okay, so that's the main part of what I wanted to get through today with you guys. So we made good progress despite me hampering everything. So the last thing I wanted to show you very briefly is just show you where it is basically, is the setup, so the library settings for the mini specs. So as you know, when you create an estimate, you can choose certain product types as you're in the process of creating the estimate. So we have mini spec options for your facing bricks, for your roof tiling, for your guttering system, for the types of fascias and barge boards that you're using, for the plant and labour that is being used for excavation and so on. So in addition to choosing your base specification, you can specify your brick price, your roof tiling type, the guttering system and so on before you even start estimating. So some of those core products have already been selected. So what mini specs mean is that you don't actually need to do quite as much work in the specification, because there's no point specifying a particular type of brick within the specification, because you will choose your brick price, your allowance price for your brick when you create your estimate, and that will be applied to the specification. Or if you select a pan tile or a plain tile or a slate tile in the mini spec, that will override the base specification. So there's no point, there's no value to you going into specifications and setting your roof tile type in there, because that's the kind of choice that you can make on a job by job basis, and that's why we have the mini specs set up. Okay, so for any of the items that we have a mini spec for, you don't need to worry about the default resources in the specification. I'd just like to show you then where the mini specs reside and where you can edit them if you feel so inclined, as you get more confident using the software and you feel you'd like to set up your own. So on the menu at the top, we've got a very concisely named button, Create / Edit Mini Spec Selection Options. So this is where you can create or edit those mini spec options. So if you click on that button, and then first of all select a mini spec from the top drop-down box. So if we start, for example, with the external wall brickwork, then in the next drop-down box you can see all the different options which are available. So we have everything from a 40p facing brick upwards. So within the 40p facing brick for extension or renovation mini spec option, you'll see that specifies the bricks below splash course, the bricks above splash course. So of course that 40p brick is specified when you use that mini spec, but also we can see the labourers who are carrying out those tasks. And the reason that the mini spec has the labour items in as well is because it's different depending on whether you select the extension or renovation variation or the new build variation. So for the new build variation, the usage factor is 0.5, whereas for the extension and renovations it was 0.6. So again, it's assuming that the build speed is going to be quicker for a new build. So that's why it's important that you pick the right option when you're creating your estimate. So this is just a mini section of the specification. It's just the bits relating to the external wall brickwork that have been picked out of the specification, and you can edit them to edit that particular option within the mini spec options. So if I give you an example of one you might create yourself actually. So let's say we wanted to create a new facing brick mini spec. Let's say prices continue to spiral and we want to add in a £1.60 facing brick. So I'm going to pick the £1.50 facing brick. I can copy it, give it a new name, so £1.60 facing brick. Click OK. So I'm now looking at my new mini spec option, £1.60. So I just need to go in and swap. You can just watch this bit if you want, just to show you that it can be done. I can swap my brick for a £1.60 brick. I can select it. Usage factor remains the same because it's a metric brick, 60 per square metre. And I'm going to do the same for bricks above DPC. If the resource you want to use isn't in the price book, you can add it using the new resource button. Okay, so I've just copied an existing mini spec option, swapped over the resource specified. The labour items can stay as they are because they're not going to lay them any more quickly or more slowly because they're a slightly more expensive brick. But now I've got that mini spec option set up. Whenever I go to create an estimate, I can select it. So another example is in roof tiling. I've set up a fibre cement slate tile. So I copied the slate for extension or renovation option and edited it for a fibre cement slate. So if you want to edit any of those options or you want to create your own, then you can do so. So I'm going to cancel out of there for now using that create stroke edit mini spec selection options button in the within a library specification. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to cover in terms of specifications. I know it's quite a bit to take in. The main thing that you need to understand is that specification dictates which materials are used and how much of a material is needed to complete each task. It also controls which labourers are used and how long it will take them to complete a task. So the last section I wanted to go through with you was the overhead profit and inflation. I can't remember now, did I touch on this before with you guys? I'll go and just give you a quick talk through. I can't remember if I touched on it earlier. Okay, so it's a really simple section. So this is where you set your default settings for overhead profit and inflation. So these are the figures that are copied into any estimates you create, but of course you can change them within an estimate. And you can also change them as you create the estimate because there's a button to review profit markup and review inflation in that new estimate wizard when you're creating your estimate. So within your library overhead profit and inflation, you want to set these figures to the rates that you would like to have as your normal rates when you start out on an estimate. So overheads will cover your general company running costs. So that includes things like insurance, offices, if you have one. I guess it's things like computer equipment and all of those like day-to-day running costs, which you're not going to actually attribute directly to an estimate. So if we separate out our overheads, we can use the profit column here as a net profit. So this is what you would like to make on a project when all your overheads have been covered. Okay, so that's your net profit. As I said before, once you're in an estimate, you can change these margins. So it might be that you complete your estimate, you look at your profit markup and you think, right, well, actually, for this job, with the complexity of it, I'd like that profit margin to be more like 20%. So you can edit that within the job. If you're not sure about your overhead and profit figures, we do actually have an overheads spreadsheet, which is really quite handy for getting a handle on your annual overheads. But of course, it's also worth having a conversation with your accountant for a bit of a steer on what figure you should be using in those columns. So the other default settings we've got here are your default inflation rates. Of course, as I mentioned before, this is something that we all really need to be thinking about at the moment, with material costs apparently increasing by 20% overall, so on average across the board from July last year to July this year. So If you're quoting for a job, I don't know how far ahead you guys are getting booked up now, but I know it can be anything like, I don't know, 9 months. So if you're planning for or estimating a job which is going to start next summer, then you need to make sure that you're factoring in inflation. Otherwise, you're going to be, if you're lucky, only just covering your costs, and you might be in like loss-making ground if you don't factor in inflation. So what these percentages mean is that's an annual inflation rate. So if I start with the bottom box, this is the delay before inflation is applied. So if you're estimating today, it's going to start applying inflation after 12 weeks. So after about 3 months, it will start applying inflation at a rate of 5% per year for your materials, 5% for your labour, and so on. Of course, you can set these rates slightly differently for the different resource types. So you might say, I want to increase my material inflation to, I don't know, I'm not an accountant, so I'm just telling you how the software works. Maybe I want to increase my inflation for my materials to 8%. So that will add those costs on incrementally over the course of the year, starting 12 weeks after this, after we carry out this estimate. This section here is setting the default rates. Again, in your estimate, you can change them. Also, when you come to create your customer quote, as we'll look at on Thursday's session, you can at that point decide whether or not to use or to add inflation onto your quote. So all the prices that you're looking at in your estimate on the quote template screen, those are obviously your construction costs, and inflation can then be applied on top of that. So that's an option within your customer quote template. So I'll show you on Thursday. But I would really urge you to make sure that inflation tick box is ticked, because if a customer's having a job done in 6 months' time, you're not going to be paying today's prices for your materials. That's one thing you can be sure of. So yeah, inflation is something that you want to get factored in there. Okay, so those are the default figures for overhead profit and inflation. There are some other options in the library that we haven't gone through in our software skills course, and that's because they're not things that you necessarily need to think about unless you want to explore as you get more advanced with the software. So within build programs, you can set up your own build program templates. Within estimating calculators, there is the potential to set up your own estimating calculators, but again, it's as you get into more advanced skills out, it's not within the remit of our course here today. But if that's something you want to have a go at a future point, then of course you can always get in touch with our tech support team for a bit of advice on that. Okay, so that is everything I wanted to cover in module 3. Thank you ever so much for bearing with me. Apologies for the delays today. So I think I've got 3 or 4 quiz questions I can go through with you. Before I do that, I'll just round off. If anyone's got places they need to be, as I'm sure some of you do, then please do feel free to nip off when you need to. So our final session, believe it or not, is this Thursday. This final session is going to be on the build program, so setting up your build program, making use of the data reports within EstimatorXpress, and also finishing off creating your customer quotation. So I'll talk through those things with you on Thursday. I'll make sure we email over a link to today's session. In the meantime, if there's anything you want to recap. Okay, so yeah, if you need to head off, please do, but I will just go through my, I think it's 4 quiz questions. Ooh. Just reinforce some of the things we've been working on today. Okay, so the first question is about the different specifications that we've got in the software. So this is a multiple answer question. So tick any that you think apply. So which of these statements is false? The renovation spec estimates longer build times than the new build. Extension and new build specification labour times are the same. The extension specification defaults to a mini digger for excavation, and the new build specification defaults to a JCB for excavation. Apologies that some of those sentences are a bit abbreviated. There's a limited number of characters I can use. So which of these statements is false? It might be that one of them is false. It might be that they're all false. Tick any that you think are untrue. Okay, thank you for sharing your answers. So 100% have said extension and new build specification labour times are the same. So that statement is false, and you're all spot on with that, because of course the extension specification allows longer for each of the tasks to be carried out. So the first statement, the renovation specification estimates longer build times than the new build. I've just reread that, and I think maybe the sentence is a bit misleading, because when we talk about longer build times, what we mean is longer build, longer build speeds, so that the individual tasks will take longer, not that the overall project will take longer. That could be misconstrued, so I think that's ambiguous wording on my part. Apologies for that. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. So I think most of these questions are in the specification. If I want to swap a specified resource, which button do I click? Edit resource, change resource, or not required? This is a bit of a gimme for you, this one. Which button do you click if you want to swap a specified resource? So if I want to swap the timber I'm using, or the block I'm using, or the gang I'm using for my laying my brickwork and blockwork, what button would I press? Okay, so the correct answer is change resource. So change resource is if you want to use a completely different resource, a different material, or a different labour or gang size for a task. Edit resource is just if you want to change the usage factor, so the amount of that resource or the time it takes that person to do a particular task. That's when you'd use edit resource. Okay, next one is about usage factors. I'm not sure what to type in for the usage factor. What should I do? Give up and make a brew, have a guess, or click the usage factor calculator button? To be fair, there's never anything wrong in stopping and making yourself a brew when you're having a bit of trouble with something, but there might be a slightly more obvious answer. I think actually the first answer used to be give up and go down the pub, and then COVID hit and it didn't seem appropriate, and then I thought I should probably be a bit more PC about it. Okay, so of course, thank you for answering that. I know it was a super simple question, but yeah, click that usage factor calculator button. It makes something which can be quite muddy and unclear all of a sudden crystal clear. So yeah, don't forget to use that tool in there. Okay, and whoops, let's hide that again. The last question then is about what type of resources I can swap. So what kind of resources can you swap in the specification? Only material resources, only labour resource, or any type of resource? but it's usually going to be material or labour in brackets. Okay, and of course you've correctly identified you can swap any type of resource, but 99% of the time you're going to be swapping a material or a labour resource. There's only a handful of plant resources in there. Okay, so that's my last question. So thank you for joining in with those quiz questions at the end as well. So I'll see you again on Thursday. So it'll be a 12:30 start again. The fourth module is a little bit longer again. We've got a bit more ground to cover, but we will no doubt round off by 2:30. So yeah, fourth and final session on Thursday. I'll get Joe to send you a link to the recording if you need to go over anything. And of course, as always, get in touch with tech support if you have any queries between now and then. So thanks again for your time today, guys. It's really nice that you're all sticking with it for the duration. I hope you feel like you're making progress in your understanding of the software and your ability to use it. So I look forward to our last session together on Thursday. So thank you very much. Have a good couple of days and I will see you then. Cheers. Bye.